first time it happened, I thought it was a genuine mistake. I remember I had fallen asleep on the sofa, and after waking, a little later than I would usually head off to bed, had dragged myself off to the bathroom to brush my teeth, with every intention of being in bed within the next 10 minutes. So I was more than a little surprised when, seconds after flipping off the bathroom light, my front doorbell rang. Checking my phone, I saw that the time was 12:35 a.m. For a moment, I just stood there in the hallway, unsure of quite what to do. Nobody that I knew would come calling on me at that hour. My parents lived miles away, and my best friend was at a wedding in another part of the country. As far as I was concerned, that meant that whoever was at the door, it was unlikely to be good news. Cautiously, I padded back along the hallway and toward the living room when the bell went again. Leaning to one side, I tried to see if I could catch a glimpse through one of the glass side panels who might be calling at such an hour. For a moment, I considered not answering, just ignoring the doorbell and heading off to bed, with the reasoning that whatever it was, it could wait until morning. The person outside, however, clearly had other ideas, because having given up on the doorbell, they decided to instead start hammering on the door. At that point, I'll admit I started to panic a little. People who try that hard to get an answer usually have something important to tell you. For a moment, I pictured blue flashing lights, police officers standing there with their solemn, "I'm afraid this is going to be bad news" faces. I thought of my parents and of my friend and began playing awful scenarios over in my head. Suddenly my head filled with these awful fantasies and I couldn't get the door open quick enough. Once I swung it open though, I saw that there was no flashing light, no stern-looking policeman, just a pimply teenager in a crash helmet and goofy-looking uniform, holding a pizza and sighing impatiently. At the end of the driveway, his moped was balanced clumsily against the garden wall in a way that would have made my mum scream had this been her house. "Can I help you?" I said, confused. "4-cheese pizza?" the boy said, lisping through his braces. "I'm sorry?" I said, still confused. "You ordered a 4-cheese pizza. Hot food delivery? I'm here to deliver it," I protested, explaining that I hadn't ordered a pizza and was actually just on my way to bed. The delivery driver heard me out, then just shrugged. "Well, do you want a pizza? I mean, it's your address on the bill and the food's already been paid for, so I guess it's free." "Wait," I said, still a little groggy from my sofa snooze and trying to get my head around what was going on. "I didn't order a pizza. In fact, I've never ordered a pizza to this address. I only moved in like a week ago. Are you sure you have the right house?" The kid sighed again. "Look, man, I got other deliveries to do. I can read a bill, okay? It's this house. The food's paid for. You want it or not? What could I do?" I took the pizza from the guy and thanked him. He lingered for a while, clearly expecting a tip, but considering I was standing there in just my underwear and socks, I'm not sure where he expected me to pull the money from. As he walked away disgruntled, I closed the door and turned back into the house. Opening the box, I looked at the pizza, which seemed perfectly fine, though I certainly had no intention of eating it. Free or not, random midnight pizza delivered by random midnight pizza dude is far from my favorite flavor, so I just left it there on the counter and went back to my original plan of going to bed. No sooner had I turned toward the hallway than the house phone began to ring. Shaking my head and wondering if this was going to all be part of some stupid joke, my best friend sending a pizza at midnight as a funny prank. I picked up the phone half expecting to hear him laughing down it. Instead, what I heard was a croaky voice, half-whispered voice. It did not say hello, but simply asked the same question 3 times. "Are you hungry, Betty?" I asked who it was. Why were they calling? Who was Betty and whether they had sent the pizza? But the phone just went dead. A little freaked out, I decided to make sure it stayed that way and unplugged it from the wall. I then went for the 3rd time to my original plan, though I'll admit I did not sleep very well. The following day was fairly normal. No strange incidents to report, and I had a good laugh telling my friends about the random pizza delivery at 12:30 at night. All of them bar one told me I should have eaten it, and that they wished someone would send free food to their house. The one who disagreed, my best friend Amy, warned that it could have been poisoned. That night, I didn't fall asleep on the sofa, but instead got an early night to catch up on the sleep I had missed the previous evening, or at least, that was the plan. At 12:35 a.m. on the dot, my front doorbell rang. By this point I was already starting to get a little cheesed off with whoever was doing this. Answering the door though, I found that my little pizza delivery friend had brought some of his own friends with him. In addition to the pizza, there was a delivery of Chinese food, and not 1 but 2 full Indian takeaways with enough food to feed 3 or 4 people. I tried to protest, told the drivers to take the food away or give it to someone who might need it, but they kept insisting that the food had been paid for and that they as drivers needed to tick off and confirm that the food had been delivered. I tried to tell them it was a mistake, but still they refused to do anything. One guy, The driver for the Indian restaurant was a little sympathetic and took me aside for a moment. "Listen, bro," he said with a smile. "Maybe someone is pranking you by sending all this stuff, and I know if random food just turned up at my house I wouldn't be eating it, but listen, these other guys, they're just delivery drivers for the company, yeah? I'm the driver for the restaurant that makes the food. I watch them make it and I'm telling you, there's nothing wrong with it. It's good food, mate. If I was you, I'd enjoy it." Smiling, I asked him what time he finished his shift, and he said this was the last stop. "Come in and help me then," I said. At first he refused politely, but after a little persuading decided to take me up on the offer. This was not a completely unselfish thing to do. In my eyes, if this guy was willing to eat the food, then it probably meant I could eat it too. So, me and my new friend Ahmed enjoyed a free Indian meal, and I promised that if I didn't get any more free food, I'd come check out his brother's restaurant one weekend. As Ahmed was getting up to leave, my mobile phone rang. Since it was now 2 a.m, I found this to be more than unusual, especially since the house phone had been unplugged. Sure enough, the same voice was on the other end. "Are you hungry, Betty?" It rasped into the receiver. Whilst the food had been good, and I'd made a new friend, I had to admit that the voice and the phone calls were already beginning to scare me a little. Letting Ahmed out into the street and dialing 69 in an attempt to trace the number, I noticed that even at this late hour, the top bedroom light in the house across the street was on. What's more, though the curtains were drawn, I could clearly see, backlit against them, the silhouette of my neighbour standing by the window, watching. I looked up at this black outline, motionless and fixed with the light on behind for several seconds, staring directly from my front porch up at the window, until suddenly the light flipped off and the entire window went dark. This, I thought, was a hell of a coincidence. What would my neighbour be doing simply staring out of the window at 2 in the morning? Ahmed and I had not been noisy when leaving the house, and would not have aroused enough attention for them to get out of bed and investigate. What's more, the light had been switched off as soon as I had looked up, which, if I'm honest, freaked me out even more, because it meant that the weirdo could still be there, standing just behind the curtain and watching me in the dark. The following night when the doorbell went, I thought I knew what to expect. Opening the door, however, I was stunned by the number of delivery drivers and the absolute stack of food that had been dropped on my doorstep. Speaking to each driver in turn, I took the time during each conversation to look over their shoulders and toward the house across the street. Sure enough, the upstairs light was on, and the outline of a figure could be seen standing at the window, veiled, somewhat ineffectively from view, standing just behind the curtain. This time, however, there was no retreat when I looked up, no switching off of the lights. Instead, the figure remained, statue-like, and watching. I had never met my neighbours, but judging from the fact there were cars in the driveway there, clearly was someone living there. As I considered whether or not I should go across the road, ring the doorbell and ask them about the strange deliveries, my phone again vibrated in my pocket. Taking out to answer, I heard that same rasping voice, asking the same question. "Are you hungry, Betty?" After around a fortnight of this, I decided to stop answering the door. Ahmed already knew that any orders to his restaurant for my address should be ignored, and for the other drivers, I left a note on the front door, telling them to simply leave the food on the doorstep. The result was that I would come down every morning or peer out through a gap in the curtains to see literally stacks of pizza boxes, bags of takeaway food completely going to waste. I did consider donating out to homeless shelters, but then I couldn't guarantee that the food was okay. Sure, the food from Ahmed's restaurant had been fine, but I didn't know if that would extend to the others. What if one dish in every 10 was laced with rat poison? I had no way of knowing. And still, with every night of deliveries, there would be a phone call. Every time the same message, and every time the same strange figure at the window, hoping to watch me eat. The thought of this faceless neighbour, a neighbour who insisted on referring to me as Betty, watching my movements from their upstairs window made my skin crawl. In the 3rd week, I called the police. I reported what had been going on as harassment, both in terms of the unwanted food and the anonymous phone calls. At first they said there was nothing they could do, but when the calls continued for another fortnight, during which I called them every day and brought them out twice to not only look at the mountain of food, but at the figure watching from across the street, they finally decided to act. They said that they would use trace software to determine the location of the call, and if, as I suspected, the call was coming from the house opposite, they would go over and speak to the neighbour. 2 days later, my evening was disturbed, not by the now familiar ring at the doorbell, or even a call on the phone, but by the sound of screaming, screams that were coming from the house across the street. As I was to find out, the police had traced the number and confirmed not only that it was my neighbour who had been calling me, but also him who had been placing all of these unwanted orders. Unfortunately, That's not all they discovered. When they called at the house to speak to my neighbor about his behavior, the officers were alerted to the sounds of a woman screaming from somewhere in the house. Figuring that someone might be in danger, they forced the door. Upon entering the upstairs bedroom, the one in which I had seen the outline of a figure watching each night through the curtain, they found an emaciated woman, skeletally thin and almost at the point of death, tied with thick ropes to a chair. She had been propped up by the window with a lamp positioned behind in such a way that when the light was switched on, her unmoving silhouette would be projected onto the curtains. The story I was told was that her abusive husband had caught her eating something that he, in his destructive control of her life, had forbidden her to eat. As a so-called punishment for this, he had strapped her to this chair and refused to feed her for almost 3 months, during which he provided her with only water and the most basic of nutrition. To add to this torture, he had propped her in a position from which she could see mountains of food being delivered every day, food that she could see and smell, food that she so desperately wanted and needed, being left, untasted, to simply stand there and rot. The phone calls made to my home and mobile were apparently done where she could hear them, and were a way for the husband to taunt her with her own gnawing, torturous hunger. The woman's husband was arrested the next day, and as far as I know is now serving a long sentence behind bars. As for the woman, she was taken to hospital, pumped with fluids and nutrients, and according to the police, was expected to make a full recovery. Apparently her name was Betty, and for a period of around 3 months, she was very hungry indeed.